Stanford University.
Welcome. Welcome to Stanford Medicine's 10th Annual Contemplation by Design Summit. I'm Dr. Tia Rich, the founder and director of Contemplation by Design. It is my honor to introduce our teachers this morning, Mei Elliott and Kodo Conlin. Together, they will be guiding us through an interactive workshop titled The Paramita Pyramid, Practices for Cultivating Wisdom and Compassion. Mei Elliott is a Dharma teacher in the Theravada Buddhist tradition who practices at the intersection between Zen and Vipassana. Mei began training as a Zen monk at Tassajara Zen Mountain Center in 2014 and has been living at Zen temples ever since. She most recently served as the director of the San Francisco Zen Center and was previously the guiding instructor for the Young Urban Zen group. Mei currently teaches at a variety of insight meditation centers on the West Coast. Kodo Conlin has practiced Buddhist meditation for nearly 20 years. He trains in both the Zen and Theravada traditions, ordaining as a Soto Zen priest in 2015. A participant in the 2021 to 2025 Insight Meditation Center teacher training, Kodo's extended residential practice has included over a year cumulatively in silent retreat. He serves as a practice leader at the San Francisco Zen Center and as guiding teacher for Young Urban Zen. Kodo's teaching emphasizes a joyful, comprehensive freedom of the heart, liberation, available through the Buddhist path. Join me in warmly welcoming Kodo and Mei.
Thank you so much, Tia. Thank you, everyone, and welcome. As Tia mentioned, the title of our workshop is the Paramita Pyramid, Practices for Cultivating Wisdom and Compassion. Now, you can consider this workshop an exploration of a dynamic union between mature self and selflessness, mature, healthy sense of self, and the Buddhist teaching of not self. We will summarize a few essential points from Mei's talk yesterday, and then engage the Buddhist practices of the 6 paramitas, the 6 perfections. We found that many of the questions that came during Mei's talk last night were asking about the practice. How do we realize emptiness? How do we cultivate a path? And this is exactly what we will be talking about today. The format will include an introduction to the perfections, just a short Q&A, and then a structured journaling exercise. So you will want some paper and something to write with or draw with, and then we'll have time for a large group discussion. The purpose of our time is for you to leave with specific actionable ways to integrate what we've found to be powerful practices into your daily life. Further discussion of the practices, the paramitas, and how they relate to emptiness will continue tonight in a lecture at 4 p.m. So first, this summary, some of the key points from Mei's talk last night, the Bodhisattva with boundaries. So she was investigating this paradox of the Buddhist teaching of not self and our need, the admonition to cultivate a healthy sense of self. If you were there, you found that Mei affirmed the need that all of us share to develop a mature, stable, confident, healthy sense of self. And then this is held in balance by the Buddhist notion of not self. From this perspective of not self, from the perspective of emptiness, we see that there isn't a separate fixed entity called me. Rather, from the view of emptiness, we see that we are much more like rivers of experience. In the language of the guided meditation that Mei offered yesterday, she investigated the sensations of a hand in direct experience And we found that sensations were much more like the sparkling of stars, flickering in and out of experience, not quite solid. By extension, what we commonly take to be a self, in this case, in relationship to the body, can we really say that this body is us, ourselves? Such is the nature of the investigation of emptiness. So we have this need for boundaries, and we have this insightful view of not self. In Buddhist language, we call these two form and emptiness. And our task is to hold both of these with wisdom and compassion. The teachings on form teach us that we need to tend to our boundaries and care for the unique individual called me. And the teachings on emptiness tell us that we're not merely an individual me, but beneath the idea of me, below the concept of me, what I call me is more like an ever-changing river. Now, these perspectives on emptiness, they're not our norm, so they take practice. And there is this path of practices available to us to help us gradually see, ease into, understand, and integrate the wisdom of form and emptiness. So in Zen, this path of practice is called the paramitas, the perfections. I will introduce each of these 6 perfections just briefly in very practical terms, unpacking them more deeply this evening. So the 6 perfections will be the subject of our journaling and our discussion. So as you listen to my descriptions of each of these 6, consider how each of the paramitas might be applicable in your own life. So a note of background, the practices of the perfections, the paramitas, it has ancient roots going back at least as far as Indian Buddhism. They are time-honored ways that countless Buddhist practitioners have prepared themselves to realize emptiness and to be of maximum service to others. There are 6 practices for waking up both the eye of wisdom and the heart of compassion, both the head and the heart together. Now, paramita means going beyond. And by training in these 6, we go beyond our limited views and ways. And we go beyond our understanding of who we are and leap into a great freedom for the benefit of all beings. People such as the Dalai Lama, Pema Chodron, Thich Nhat Hanh, Suzuki Roshi, Sokni and Mingyur Rinpoche, these masters that are known and loved across centuries and across traditions have cultivated these 6 practices as foundations of their way. So these 6 practices are, first, in Sanskrit, dana paramita. That is the perfection of giving, generosity, graciousness. The second paramita, the second perfection, is sila, shila, ethical conduct. Third is kshanti, patience. Fourth is virya, energy, heroic effort. Dhyana, meditation, concentration, and prajna, wisdom. As the Dharma teacher Gil Fransall has pointed out, in Soto Zen, this tradition in which we've trained, we emphasize the teaching of practice enlightenment. That is, the path and the goal are one. To become peaceful, for example, we practice peace. To become compassionate, we practice compassion. In this spirit, during our workshop, we'll imagine together ways to practice each of the 6 paramitas. Practicing giving, for example, to become generous. Practicing ethical conduct to become virtuous. Patience to become patient. Practicing effort to become energetic. Meditating to become mindful, and practicing wisdom to perfect wisdom. So moving into some illustration of each of these. First, dana paramita, generosity, giving. One way we might practice dana paramita is inspired by a practice I read by Jack Kornfield. He encouraged trying out taking $21 bills, carrying them around with you, And for a week, anytime someone asks you for $1, you give it to them. Pretty radical practice. Or until very recently, I lived in San Francisco, and frequently being asked for things while I was out on the street, I would pack an extra pair of socks in my bag so that I had something to offer that could be of use. Or I kept a can of food in the car for the same reason. One other possibility, you might research or look into what I call high leverage giving. That is uh, organizations that you can be confident and believe in that are doing good work. Looking into one such organization, I found that our giving actually doesn't have to be so much in order to have a great effect in the world. For example, there's this organization called Action Against Hunger that has such low overhead that I found I could give one meal for every meal that I ate for just a few dollars a month. Pretty amazing. So these are a few examples of exploring how we might apply giving, generosity in our lives. So I'll pause just for a moment for you to consider, for our reflections today, where in your life you might like to bring more generosity. I have more time for this reflection. To continue with the introduction of these paramitas, the second, Shila, ethical conduct. Now, this perfection, Sila Paramita, usually entails specific ethical commitments that all build on a central principle, one that will be familiar to our ears, I think. That is, doing no harm. We take wise action that helps rather than harms. Thinking about this in relation to meditation practice, a reflection might be, how is our conduct either mindfulness supporting or mindfulness diminishing? More generally, when considering how to apply Sila Paramita in our lives, one approach would be to consider, are there any ways that I'm actually harming other beings with the actions of my body, with the actions of my speech, my words, maybe slander, maybe divisive speech, or with my actions of mind, with my thoughts? Am I harming others? You can carry this reflection even further. Am I harming myself? So a regular, honest reflection on this question tends to be rather humbling. And we can um, grow a lotus in muddy water, let's say. We can celebrate when we find a place that maybe our conduct has not been perfect, because right there is where we practice. We'll talk a bit more about the specific ethical trainings in Zen in the next section. The third of the paramitas, the third of the perfections is patience, kshanti. I will ask, can you imagine someone in your life who has great patience? Somebody who never is perturbed even under very trying circumstances. How do they act? What do they do? How do they bear it? And instead of practicing impatience, what do they do? In my life, this was my grandmother. I've never known exactly how she kept such a calm attitude and serene face and gentle speech with so much challenge. If I could ask her now how she did it, I would. But I invite for your reflection. Who would you ask? And for your consideration, is there a situation in your life where you would like to bring greater patience? The fourth paramita, the fourth perfection, virya paramita, energy, sometimes translated as heroic effort. This perfection might look like inspiration, it might look like aspiration or diligence, or it might look like slow, steady effort. For each of us, there's a spectrum of available energy. And part of the art of Virya Paramita is applying the correct amount of energy in a given situation. So training in the perfection of energy might look like something like interval training. That is dedicating oneself undistractedly to one task or activity wholeheartedly for, let's say, 5 minutes or 20 minutes or 60 minutes. It might look like training yourself to go just beyond comfort, but not too far. It's said that in Buddhist practice, nothing is possible without virya paramita, without energy. The aspirations of some of the great practitioners to end the suffering for all beings requires an unfathomable amount of energy. And we can start small. So is there a wholesome activity in your life that you would like to dedicate more energy to? The fifth perfection, dhyana, meditation. I think we found that meditation training is best done on a consistent basis for durations that are realistic for our lives. If you're just starting out, let's say, in meditation, maybe 20 minutes twice per day is a good aim. What if we let go of a little bit of scroll time to sit still with the breathing? The timer is really helpful. The suggestion is to ground in some clear instructions with a good teacher, and then there's just one thing you have to do the meditation. When mindfulness is grounded on the cushion, then it more easily extends to all of our activities. So if you would like to bring meditation into your daily life, if that's something you're working on, do you have an intention for how often, how long, and what time of day you'd like to do this? Transitioning to the last of the perfections, the sixth. I'll say that the paramitas are often practiced in order. There's some creativity available to us. But it makes sense that the first five, giving, ethical conduct, patience, energy, and meditation, set the stage for the sixth perfection to arise. The sixth perfection is prajna paramita, or wisdom. So in the paramita system, wisdom or prajna most often refers to a realization of emptiness. Just what Mei was talking about last night, and we'll expand on in the rest of these sessions. In short, we might say this realization of emptiness is an understanding that we lack a static essence in this continuity of body and mind. What we were investigating with the hand, there's actually not a fixed self in this body. But the pointings to perfection of wisdom and the things we come to realize are many. They are many. We set the stage for wisdom to arise by cultivating the first five paramitas and by diminishing any support we give to delusion. So one way to interrogate what might be unseen delusion in ourselves, you might consider questioning the stories that you tell yourself and others. Or you might look again at the labels that you place on things. An alternate reflection might be as simple as, how am I clouding the mind and how am I clearing it? Regarding wisdom, it's taught that when the fruit is ripe, it will fall from the tree. So wisdom comes in its own time. One more helpful perspective on the perfection of wisdom is that we're not static, fixed beings, but rather we're much more like rivers. And yet we tell ourselves stories about ourselves that fixate on certain aspects of our body and our mind. These are often called fixed views. Now, for our activity today, consider bringing to mind one fixed view or story you have about yourself. For some, it might be, I'm judgmental, or I'm not smart enough, or I have this difficulty, I'm challenged at my job. All of these might be examples of beliefs that are just asking for greater wisdom. one courageous approach that's applicable to all of the perfections. The practice of each paramita is the study of its opposite. This means, for example, that if I want to find out precisely in my life how to apply generosity, I study how and where stinginess arises. Or for patience, I study how does impatience show up in my life? Just there is asking for investigation and more wisdom. To develop the fifth paramita, meditation, so much can be learned by contemplating our mind when it's scattered. Each of us, of course, has our own conditioning. And that is, for some, the first paramita of generosity comes easily. For others, it may be very uncomfortable. For others of us, we may take very easily to meditation, like a fish to water. For some other folks, getting on a meditation cushion or a chair may feel a lot more like a painful belly flop. The third paramita, patience, may be challenging for some, easy for others. So part of what we'll do today is reflect on the practices that are possible for us under our circumstances and which practices are most needed. So these are the 6 perfections. I hope these examples have maybe seeded the ground for you to reflect on your own situation and start to see how we can plant the seeds of these perfections and how they can grow. We'll now have some time for Q&A just to make sure this material is clear before we move on. You're also free to ask questions about things that came up last night in Mei's lecture if you'd like, if that helps support. Yeah, in true Zen spirit, we say all of these are true. The paramitas very, very often are taught in order, beginning with giving, developing the qualities of generosity, developing the qualities of virtue that come along with ethical conduct. One of the things that opens with the perfection of wisdom is, in fact, that every paramita is reflected in all of the others. That's part of what gives us creative license when it comes to practicing the paramitas. So you can think of them in a linear way, where you begin with giving, you end with wisdom. You can think of them as a cycle that repeats. Once you get to wisdom, you go back to giving and start it over again. I like to think of them as sort of a network of qualities that can grow up together. And less important than the order in which we practice them is that we feed them all. It's a little, the image I have is a little bit like the mycelium that grows in the forest floor. It's this one living organism that communicates and feeds, and it's alive. We feed the qualities of meditation, let's say, and that strengthens our generosity and strengthens our wisdom.
While this pertains to some of the content I shared yesterday, it also very much pertains to the content Kodo just shared, because one of our paramitas is patience. The antidote to anger is patience, right? And that's one of the reasons patience is so difficult to practice, because states of aversion like anger often are so dominant and so difficult to hold that it's very difficult to be patient. So as Kodo suggested, a patience practice, learning to be with what's discomfort, what's uncomfortable without reactivity is extremely helpful. And it seems like in the question, this person has learned how to work with their own anger, but the question is really about how to work with, I think it's triggering others' anger. Let me reread that. Yeah, how to not be triggered by anger in others. So I think it's a really common experience is when somebody else gets angry. Anger is like almost contagious, right? It's easy to feel that activated, feel anger activated in ourselves when it comes up in someone else. So sometimes we can't help but be triggered. But can we, if anger does come up when somebody else is angry, can we be with that in a way that doesn't further feed the fire? So it might be just being mindful of the anger in the body and feeling the physical sensations, the emotion, noticing what sort of motivations come out of it. Often the motivations that come out of anger are wanting to bite or snap verbally, do something that's harmful to the other. So if we can check that impulse and practice restraining, that can be really helpful. So there's a variety of ways to work with anger if it does arise. And then sometimes we can be with somebody's anger without needing to echo that same feeling. If we look at the Satipatthana Sutta in the early Buddhist teachings, the Buddha gives the practice instruction to be mindful internally and mindful externally of emotions. And so mindful internally would be like, oh, I'm going to be mindful. I'm going to practice non-judgmental awareness, present moment awareness of anger internally. So what does being mindful externally mean? That means being present to when an emotion for someone else arises. So can we bring that same non-judgmental, present-centered awareness to anger externally, just noticing what's happening for the other without needing to react? So those are some reflections on how we can be with someone else without somebody else's anger, without it needing to trigger our own reactivity. So training in mindfulness helps us be with not just our own anger, but that of others. Very good question.
Thank you so much for the question. Yeah, this is an important reflection because the self-evaluative mechanism can so easily turn on, and then tip from wholesome to balance to self-criticism. So how to engage in the evaluative practice and then take on the practice in a way that is wholesome, supportive for us, and that we can manage. The principle here, of course, is staying not in the comfort zone, but not in the red, but in the learning zone. Of course, I would suggest two things. One is if I love how you put this. If you have a lot of practice opportunities with the paramitas, one way you can guide yourself. I'm going to offer you two. One way you can guide yourself is actually to go in order. Start with giving, and sort of spend a set amount of time focusing on where are the opportunities with giving. And once you feel grounded in that, then you can move on to the next. There's a lot of creativity, though. You can start with giving. You could start elsewhere. So the second point I want to make is follow the joy. So if working with let's say patience, the third perfection, for whatever reason in your circumstance, the practice of patience is bringing you an encouraging, wholesome joy, I would say go for that. The joys that come out of practicing these wholesome qualities are so nourishing and onward leading for us. So those would be my thoughts. Either you can progress in this linear way, but at this moment, I really like saying, follow the joy.
A great question. So Let's see here. So last night, in speaking about the importance of boundaries, part of what I was acknowledging was that it's so common with spiritual practitioners to see examples of selfless generosity in the great masters throughout time, and think that we're not supposed to have boundaries, that, to be a true spiritual practitioner, we need to give and give and give and give with no regard to ourselves. But that actually, what I was sharing in the talk was that's actually not so. We need to include ourselves in the circle of care. We need to be, at times, we absolutely need to be boundaried to care for ourselves. Otherwise, we can end up depleted and diminished, and it actually engage in spiritual bypassing where we're not caring for our own needs. So that's just a little background. Now to share a bit about how, starting with Dana, how Dana can, how generosity relates to healthy boundaries. And so while often when we think of generosity as something like we're giving something to other people, Dana Paramita, it also applies to ourselves. So how can we be generous with ourselves? So we're including ourselves in the circle of care, right? And so we can think of, in certain situations, we practice generosity externally, and we pay attention to whether during that process, whether it starts feeling like we're overgiving or we're depleting ourselves, and it's time to come back into balance and practice generosity with ourselves. So, I need to rest, or I need to take care to manage my finances and not give away all of my money, or whatever it is, but making sure to turn the light to shine inward and not just outward with our generosity. Another part of the question is, how does prajna, wisdom, pertain to boundaries? So one of the ways that wisdom functions as we engage in meditation, mindfulness practice, what we start to see is when we're suffering and when we're not suffering. We get really attuned to noticing if there's contraction and tightness in the body, if there's some way that we're struggling in any given situation. And then wisdom helps us learn how to wisely work with that suffering. Sometimes that response is to do internal work to let go of the suffering. And sometimes wisdom has us take an external action. So really getting attuned to suffering internally and suffering externally helps us it helps us become more sensitive and more wise about what the next right action is. And sometimes wisdom will say, this situation needs a boundary. Like, harm's happening here, so I need to draw a boundary. Suffering's happening here, so I need to draw a boundary. Or it might say, suffering's happening externally, and I feel fine. I don't need to be so boundaried here. I can give. So those are some ways that prajna relates to boundaries in this setting. And of course, actually, all of the paramitas support us in learning to be generous and have wise boundaries, because the practice of the paramitas support both learning how to have a healthy, mature sense of self, as well as having insight into emptiness, having an insight into not self. So it teaches us how to give more fully externally, in a selfless way at times, and also how to care for ourselves more fully. Because these practices are the practices of a bodhisattva, and a bodhisattva cares for all other beings and oneself. So hopefully that gives you a sense of how boundaries and these practices relate to each other. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Mei. I think it may be time to transition.
Sure, great. Wonderful questions, everyone. Thank you for those. So we're going to shift now. Let's see. We're going to shift into a journaling exercise. And this will be, you'll have an opportunity to reflect and integrate some of the teachings on the paramitas. So this activity is called the Paramita Pyramid. And in this, you'll reflect on where in your life would you like to engage each specific paramita? Like, is there a specific situation where you would like to engage generosity, where you would like to engage ethical behavior, etc.? And how would you do this? So that's really the prompt. And for each paramita, you'll have about two to 3 minutes to reflect and journal on it. And I'll guide you through that, and I'll refresh you on each paramita as we go, so that you're not struggling to remember what that paramita is and what it's about. But I also want to be just kind of open up the possibility of being creative with how you interpret the paramitas too. So, for example, with the first paramita of generosity, dana, often people associate that with material gifts, but you could think of it in other ways too. So, for example, maybe you'd like to be more generous with your compliments towards your coworkers or those you supervise or your spouse. Or maybe you'd like to be more generous in your assumptions about others. Maybe you have a tendency to assume that others have negative intentions and you'd like to hold a more generous stance. Or maybe you want to be generous by attending more of your niece's soccer games. So being generous with your time and your attention. You can be generous with your listening. And Kodo will share about a variety of other forms of creative generosity in his teaching this evening. But just wanted to start with that for you to consider that generosity is much wider than just material gifts. So, so let's see here. So just a few more guidelines for the journaling. Let it be a free write. So if possible, keep the pen or pencil moving. And it's okay if typing's easier for you. If you want to use a word processing document or Google Docs, that's fine too. But yeah, keep the flow. Whatever you write doesn't have to be perfect. The idea is that you're brainstorming, you're exploring the content. So nobody's going to be reading these. You're not going to be asked to read these to anyone. So feel free to be open. And what I'll do is I'll ring a bell every 2 to 3 minutes to remind you to switch to the next paramita. And also, lastly, if you're not sure how you want to respond to a certain paramita, that's totally fine. Instead, you can write what you're not sure about regarding that paramita, or write your questions if you don't have a specific answer to where you'd like to bring that paramita into your life. Okay.
Mei, if I may ask for one clarification, in your opening instruction, the phrase "where you would like to" was what I heard. And if you'd clarify if your intention is for us to write solely about new domains and new ways of expression in the future tense, or whether it includes sustaining something that we currently do.
Oh, that's so great, Tia. Thanks for bringing that in. Yeah, absolutely. The right effort teachings in the Buddhist tradition talk about both cultivating and maintaining wholesome activities. So cultivating and maintaining generosity is really important. So if there's already some act of generosity that you're engaged in, and you want to set the intention to maintain that, to continue that, it's fabulous. So that's great. And if other things come up too, that's fine. If you run out of things you want to intend to continue or cultivate, you can reflect on past actions of generosity. So this is open. There's room just for you to journal in a way that's supportive for you. So go ahead and get your writing materials out. And we'll start with our reflection on Dana Paramita, the perfection of generosity. So where in your life, in what situations, would you like to engage this specific paramita? Are there certain settings or ways that you'd like to bring this into your life or continue it in your life? So we'll have some time in silence now for you to reflect. start coming to a close on your reflection about dana, about generosity. And we'll shift to the second paramita, sila, ethical conduct. So as a refresher, this perfection is about doing no harm. So we take wise actions that help rather than hurt ourselves and others. So you might ask, are there ways that I'm actually harming beings with my actions of body, speech, or mind? And traditionally, the practice of the precepts supports this. So are there ways that you're taking what's not freely given, stealing in small ways, even taking postage stamps from work that weren't given to you or offered freely to you, or borrowing things from your roommates, taking things from your roommates that they haven't offered. So I share these just as very small ways that we might explore this paramita, or lying, telling things like slight dishonesties or slandering, or variations on killing living beings, insects, or eating meat. And not saying that eating meat is wrong, but this is something that comes up for people as we explore the ethical precepts. So those are just some ways you can explore this. So where in your life would you like to engage this specific paramita? Is there a specific situation you'd like to explore this in? All right, and beginning to bring your reflections on the second paramita to a close. And we'll now explore the third paramita, Kshanti, patience. So you might bring to mind a situation that's difficult for you, or a person that you're struggling with. Maybe a situation where you're wishing it was otherwise, something you're not wanting or pushing away. chances are, if you have a situation like this or a person like this in your life that you're challenged by, any of these situations or people could benefit. Maybe I should say you might be able to benefit from cultivating patience in relationship to them. So where in your life would you like to engage this specific paramita? And what situation or person would you like to apply it to? So go ahead and start wrapping up your reflections on the third paramita, patience. And we'll shift to the fourth paramita, virya, or energy. So as Kodo said in his introduction, virya can look a lot of different ways. It can look like inspiration or aspiration, or often diligence, bringing energy to something, effort. And there's a range of energy, and part of the art of virya is learning how to apply the correct amount of energy for the given situation. So some situations really need our effort and energy. There's a Zen phrase, practice like your hair is on fire, bringing tons of energy to the practice. And then there's other situations that actually, it makes more sense to have less energy. And again, Kodo will explain this in full in his talk this evening. But just to open up the possibilities for what you reflect on, is there a wholesome activity in your life that you would like to dedicate more energy to, that you'd like to increase your energy when you're doing it so that you're more engaged? Or you might reflect on whether you're over-efforting in certain situations in your life, and you could benefit from a more balanced energy, more relaxed energy. So see what comes up for you as you reflect on this. Go ahead and start wrapping up your reflections from the fourth paramita, virya. And we'll shift to the fifth perfection, jhana, meditation. So some people are very gung-ho about meditation and some aren't. So this may or may not be something you want to integrate into your life. And if it's not something that's integrated into your life currently, but you're enthusiastic about these teachings and you're interested in cultivating the paramitas, I might suggest you try it. Even if it's just doing a couple minutes a day. I have some students who they sit 5 minutes a day, and that's what they have time for, and they benefit from it. Or students who sit for 40 minutes 3 times a week. And then there's people who sit 2 hours a day. So for this reflection, if you'd like to bring meditation into your life, what's your intention for how often, how long you'd like to sit, what time of day you'd like to sit. So actually journaling this, it helps in setting an intention. It strengthens the intention to actually write it down in this way to reflect on it. So we'll have a little time now to think about if and how you'd like to incorporate meditation into your life. And of course, I want to acknowledge here, some of you already have an active meditation practice. So you might reflect on how you'd like to continue that, if you want to make any changes, or what exactly, if there's any intention specifically for how you're practicing, for what's happening in your meditation. Wrapping up your reflections on meditation now. And shifting to the sixth perfection, prajna. As Kodo said, it's through practicing the first 5 that the fruit of wisdom, the sixth perfection, can manifest. And so to reflect on this one, there are many ways that wisdom can come forth in our life. One way that we're offering today for this exercise is to consider our stories and fixed views about ourselves. So as Kodo shared, though it seems like we're a fixed static me moving through time and space, we're actually a lot more like rivers of experience, a flow of physical sensations, emotions, and thoughts always changing. And yet we tell ourselves stories about ourselves that fixate on certain aspects of our body and mind. So these fixed views that are often about ourselves, and sometimes they're not so beneficial. So Kodo shared the example of a fixed view of I'm not smart enough, or I'm judgmental, or I'm bad at my job. And these fixed views, these fixed stories, can be beliefs that ask for greater wisdom. So what fixed views do you have about yourself that could benefit from some greater wisdom, some greater understanding of your own changing nature? Right, you can begin to wrap up your reflections on the sixth paramita, wisdom. And we'll shift a little now. As you may recall, this activity is called the Paramita Pyramid. So this is where the pyramid comes in. So I'm going to ask Kodo to share a slide with us. It's a very simple drawing of a pyramid. So as you can see, there are 6 boxes, one for each of the paramitas. And so what you'll do is you'll create a hand-drawn version of this on your sheet. Don't spend too much time making the boxes perfect or getting out a ruler or anything like that. You're just making 6 boxes on your sheet of paper in this particular formation. 3 boxes in the bottom row, 2 in the middle row, and 1 at the top. And what you'll do is you'll write 1 paramita in each box. And what this part of the exercise is about is putting them in priority, in order of priority for your order of importance. So the most important, or the one that feels like the highest priority for you in your life, will be at the top. And then the middle layers, middle priority, and the 3 at the bottom will be lower priority. And so there's a question earlier on about just how, wow, these are a lot of practices and how to not be overwhelmed by them. So this can help you prioritize them in your life, of what you really want to focus on most. So we'll have about 4 or 5 minutes now for you to take some time to choose which paramitas go where. So what you can do is just write in the name of that paramita in the given box. And if you want, you can put a couple words or a sentence to remind you of your intention around that paramita. So again, high priority at the top, lowest at the bottom. And we'll have some time in silence now for you to do that. And begin to wrap up your Paramita pyramid. Okay. So I hope as you did this, you learned something and you were able to set some intentions for how you'd like to integrate these teachings into your life. Sometimes simply engaging with the content, actually just reflecting on it, helps us learn it more deeply. It's like planting seeds that can then grow and sprout in their own time in the rest of your life. The other hope is now you actually have a sheet of paper that has these the paramitas on it and your intentions. So you might put that in your house in a visible space. Maybe you put it on your mirror in your bathroom or somewhere that you see it to remind you of your intentions. Okay, so we'll have a little time now for the rest of the session until 11:30 for a large group discussion. During this time, questions are totally welcome and comments are welcome. Some comments that you might consider sharing is what came up for you while doing this activity? What did you discover? Or is there an intention that you might like to share out loud? Actually, verbalizing an intention can give it a deeper karmic footprint. It increases the likelihood of follow through to actually say it out loud. So maybe you want to share an intention of a way that you want to engage the paramitas in your life, or one of the paramitas in your life. So the question in the chat. Great. So just a reflection. Thank you so much for the guided self-reflecting exercise, which allowed me to see clearly, directing my efforts to balance virya. Thank you for the opportunity to be with you today. Great. Thank you.
Thank you so much for bringing this up. I think this is what we're talking about in terms of ethical practices. For a lot of us, brings up a really strong reaction. So I'm really glad that this comes into the conversation. Thank you for naming it. Yeah, a couple of things I'd like to say. One is a lot of us come into the practice of the paramitas with a lot of background, family background, cultural background, religious background. That was certainly true for me, which prepared me for a sort of painful engagement with ethical practices. Just thinking about them, engaging with them was challenging for my heart and for my mind. One of the notions that was not made explicit here, but I think is really important and very different, is that there's no expectation at perfection. And that was mind-blowing for me. We aim in the direction of something wholesome, and we do our best, and we live in a complicated world, and we're complicated beings. So that's sort of built in. This was expressed really nicely by Jiryu Richmond Byler, he's now the abbot at Green Gulch Farm Zen Center. And in a little bit of a playful way, he was reflecting on the fact that it's part of the Buddhist community of practices, that twice a month there's a ceremony where every monk in the monastic community confesses what has happened for the last 2 months, or where their practice has sort of fallen short. His emphasis was not on the confession part. That has a whole lot of conditioning. It was actually how did they know that every 2 weeks we were going to have, we would have something in our conduct that we would have to reflect on and say, oh, wow, ouch. So there was a little bit of humor. there's a little bit of levity and an appreciation for the fact that we're imperfect beings. We're imperfect beings living in an imperfect world. So I appreciate the reaction and the response, and you naming the challenge, because I think that's something a lot of us share. Yeah, thanks. That's possible. I mean, not knowing you, I can't make an assessment like that about what might be the root cause. But I know, talking to many people, this is often something that comes up, and it comes up in relationship with a sort of our religious cultural heritage. May, anything you'd like to add?
That was great. Thank you, Kodo. Yeah, I might just notice what uh, if you're relating to the ethical guidelines with the addition of judgment. So track for judgment. The ethical precepts in Buddhism are not commandments. They're guidelines for happiness. It's actually, they're guidelines that will support well-being in our own lives and the lives of others. And so if we can just track for any judgment around it, we can start to distinguish and separate what's actually the ethical guideline and what's this extra, this addition of judgment, which is actually not the ethical guideline. So that might be something that you investigate in your relationship to the precepts, to these ethical teachings. Great questions. Thank you. Fabulous comment. I think that's really helpful framing. I love that the perspective shift of remembering that our ethical actions are seeding our future self. And that's very aligned with Buddhism, that the parts of ourselves that grow are the ones that we feed. And we feed them by acting on them through actions of body, speech, and mind. And so what we feed grows. What we don't feed diminishes. So if we want to be in the world in a way that doesn't cause harm, then we want to feed actions that don't cause harm. And we grow into a being that doesn't cause harm. That's great. Thank you. I see we have a comment in the chat. It's like appreciating the exercise and the inviting space for the inquiry. And says, this reminds me of Chris Germer's talk on self-compassion and his comments about the goal is to, quote, become a compassionate mess, end quote, which relates to becoming fully human. His humorous comment that we are already a mess and inviting us to embrace that resonated with me. Yeah, great. Yeah, imperfect beings. It's a wonderful phrase for it. And another comment in the chat. I really appreciate and I'm learning so much from your teachings in this exercise. Thank you. I found that patience was coming up in my reflections and intention setting for energy and ethical conduct. As Kodo explained, there's clear interconnection. I put patience at the top of my pyramid and look forward to the growth that will come from my practice starting there. Ah, beautiful. That's really lovely to hear your reflections on this, and the way that you are centering patience as something that you want to cultivate in your life. And just every moment that you experience something difficult, whether that's a very small thing or large thing, your willingness to be with it for a moment, 2 moments, 3 moments, without reactivity, without judgment or shaming or blaming or fighting or pushing away. Just being willing to be with discomfort for a few moments grows that muscle of patience. So every time you do that, you're growing that capacity.
May I received one question privately, so I will I'll bring it into the room anonymously, if that's all right. So this says that patience was difficult to explore as it brought me into greater awareness of my sadness and loneliness within relationships that call upon me to continue to be even more patient. I recognize that I devote a lot of life energy to the relationships that call for patience, even more than to the relationships in which I feel connection, seen and known. The relationships that call for sustained and greater patience also are the ones that drain my energy. How can I open into the possibility of discovering energy that can arise while expressing patience? This is a great question. The question is, can patience be a regenerative practice rather than a draining practice? Thank you so much. Thank you so much for bringing this in. I think part of my appreciation for the question is it already speaks to both sides. There's an aspect of cultivation in all of these practices. Actually, there's an aspect of cultivation and there's an aspect of restraint. And this form of patience that is in the form of restraint often takes a lot of energy. It's a bit like trying to press the brake and the gas at the same time, or like trying to hold back someone really powerful who's trying to run. This is like the restraint side of patience, and it takes a lot of work. I think the fruit comes in an unseen way. The regenerative aspect of patience comes in an unseen way, and that is when those muscles become strong, then we realize the freedom of not anger, or the freedom from impatience. Thich Nhat Hanh relates this to appreciating my non-toothache. We only feel the ouch, but maybe forget to appreciate when our tooth doesn't hurt. So the applying that notion to opening to the possibility of a form of patience practice that's regenerative, that's nourishing, is to look for and appreciate those moments of non-anger, non-impatience that are already present, and to let those nourish the system. It's not to say there won't be powerful energy required for the practice of restraint also, but it's a way that you can bring these things into balance. So thank you for offering the question. May I see we're just about at time. Is there anything you'd like to offer to close?
Yeah, thank you, Kodo. Just wanted to let you all know how much I enjoyed this time with you, and I really appreciate your sincere questions and your comments and your willingness to engage in these practices. And like we saw with our last question there, as we begin to look at the paramitas, sometimes what we see is their absence, or we see what the opposite of the paramita. So it's almost like putting a dirty rag in the wash, and these practices bring the dirt out. And ultimately, the rag becomes clean. Our mind becomes clean. But in the process, there can be some purification that takes place. So thank you. Thank you for being here. Thank you for doing this work that is sometimes not easy, and in the spirit of being more free in your life. and being of greater service to others.
Thank you, Kodo, and thank you, Mei, for this very meaningful and illuminating practice.
Thanks
Good
so
joy.
much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone. Take care.